Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the Council for Strategic Affairs Roundtable discussion. We are here once again to discuss a very important topic. Today is December 11th, Sunday. It's 10 a.m. in the New York, and it is 8:30 p.m. in India. We have a very interesting discussion today. If you can see my PowerPoint, China's belligerence towards Taiwan, risk of a wider conflict. And those of you who registered probably saw this flyer of us with pictures of our three distinguished panelists. And those panelists are Commodore R. Seshadri Vasan, Dr. Swasti Rao, Mr. Francois Gautier. A little bit about Council for Strategic Affairs. The Council imparts education in the field of international relations. The Council fosters discussion, dialogue, and debate on geopolitical issues of contemporary nature. Council also encourages strategic studies in general to raise the level of awareness. We explicitly condemn terrorism in all forms and anywhere in the world. No excuses for terrorism. The Council aims to contribute towards world peace and prosperity. So usually we have a monthly roundtable discussion. The usual time is second Saturday of each month at 10 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. This time we have an exception because of scheduling conflict. So we are having it on a Sunday. I will tell you later why we did this. There's a monthly guest lecture by a domain expert on fourth Saturday of each month. We organize symposia, meetings, and conferences. We promote publications of articles on geopolitics, politics, and related subjects. And we have a summer internship program for college students. And this is our first distinguished panelist, Francois. Francois Gautier is a political correspondent and a journalist who has been based in Indian subcontinent for more than 10 years. He was the political correspondent of Le Figaro, France's largest daily. He is currently editor-in-chief of Paris-based La Revue de Hindi, published by Les Deshartmatan. He has written several books on India. I'm not going to read all of them. He's also building a museum of Indian history in Pune. He is married for 25 years to an Indian lady, Namrata Bindra Kaur Gautier. He shuttles his time between Puducherry, Pune, and Delhi. He primarily lives in Auroville in Puducherry. Gautier has established the Foundation for Advancement of Cultural Ties, FACT, an NGO dedicated to portraying Indian history in correct manner. In 2012, he started a Shivaji Maharaj Museum of Indian History. In 2013, he met with His Holiness Dalai Lama and organized an exhibition on the origin of Buddhism in India. He is very intricately involved in Tibetan issues and Chinese operation of Tibet. He received 5 Janyas Nachiketa Awards, Bipin Chandra Paul Award, named after historian Bipin Chandra Paul. And whatever money he got from these awards, he donated to the foundation he has started. Our second speaker is Dr. Swasti Rao. Dr. Swasti Rao is Associate Fellow at the Europe and Eurasia Center at the prestigious Manohar Parrikar Institute of Defense Studies and Analysis. She has a master's degree in politics with specialization in international relations and an MPhil degree in East Asian Studies from Jawaharlal Nehru University in New Delhi. She completed her PhD in Advanced International Politics from Tsukuba University in Japan. She is a recipient of Japanese Educational Ministry Fellowship and also recipient of Okita Memorial Scholarship in 2010 from ICCR. She holds an adjunct position at the Tokai University in Japan in capacity of foreign collaborator for Japan Studies for Promotion of Science. Her current research project at the Manohar Parrikar Institute is on conflicts in Europe amidst shifting global power structure, geometries of deterrence, and Europe's Indo-Pacific outreach as strategies for threat balancing. Other works and research have explored dimensions of securitization debate in Europe, migrant crisis, Europe's outreach to Indo-Pacific, etc. Before joining Manohar Parrikar Institute, she was assistant professor in the Department of Strategic and Security Studies at AMU, where she taught courses in European security, rise of China, implications of world order, research methodology, and UN peacekeeping. She has been involved in syllabus writing for political science at CBCS, IGNOU for year 2020 and has been associated with the National University of Educational Planning and Administration. She has also published extensively, delivered talks and lectures at various international universities like Australian National University, Canberra, Gakushuin University, and Tokai University in Japan. So she is a very, very accomplished researcher and international relations expert. Our last speaker, who is very well known to us because he has been on our platform several times, is Commodore R. Seshadri Vasan. Commodore Vasan is an alumnus of Defense Services Staff College, the Naval War College, and the International Visitor Leadership Program in USA. He has a distinguished naval career spanning over 34 years. His wide-ranging appointments since commissioning in 1969, both at the sea and ashore, included commands of warship, appointment in career-borne wing of INS Vikrant, command of long-range maritime reconnaissance AW squadron, member examiner of air crew categorization and standardization board, Chief Staff Officer at Southern Naval Command and Premier Training Command of Indian Navy. He has participated both in 1971 operations and also IPKF operations. Since his retirement, he has been writing regularly for various journals, newspapers, websites. He has been conducting workshops, delivering talks for international delegates on maritime issues, military diplomacy, etc., etc. But more importantly, he is director of the Chennai Center for China Studies, a premier Indian think tank on sinology. He is also head of strategy and security studies at the Center for Asia Studies. He has taken over as the regional director of National Maritime Foundation, Chennai chapter since 2016. He was elected as president of Navy Foundation Chennai chapter in August of 2019. So I don't want to go through all his accomplishments. The proof of pudding lies in eating. So when you hear him, you will, enjoy his scholarship. Before I give the platform to our distinguished speakers, a little bit of introduction. So this is the political map of the country that is Taiwan. And I'm using the word country because I have freedom of expression. And this is the Taiwan Strait between mainland China and Taiwan, around 110 miles. A little bit of about history. Chinese Communist Party has had three paramount leaders, starting with Mao Zedong, Deng Xiaoping, and Xi Jinping. Probably the most pragmatic was the middle one, Deng. Over a period of China has militarized heavily and probably in certain areas excels the traditional superpowers, especially in maritime and naval power. Land Navy has, at this point in time, largest number of combatant ships. So Deng Xiaoping gave the wisdom of future generations by delaying the conflict. And he recalls a fable of a medieval prisoner who delayed his execution by promising to teach the king's horse how to speak. And the prisoner said, "Who knows? The king may die, the horse may die, or the horse may speak, but his execution would be delayed." So that was the philosophy of Deng. Unfortunately, Xi Jinping is in a hurry to make his mark, and Xi Jinping discarded the Deng doctrine of hiding your strength and biding your time. So we are in uncharted territory, and of course, I don't want to say much. Our panelists will take over from here. But before I hand it over to the panelists, a few housekeeping rules. I would expect everyone to mute themselves to avoid noise interference. Kindly change your cell phone setting to vibration mode. When our esteemed speakers are speaking, please don't interrupt them. Only those members of the audience who identify themselves will be allowed to ask questions. We don't encourage anonymous questioners. All the questions are moderated. They have to be submitted through chat function. Questions have to be precise and specific. You can't post lengthy comments in the garb of a question or in the form of a monologue. And lastly, like all other programs of the Council for Strategic Affairs, this program is being recorded. It will be available on our channels, whether YouTube, Rumble, or Odyssey, as well as on our website within next 24 hours. I'm going to start with my friend Francois Gautier, who has been on this forum before. He has another seminar after this, so I acceded to his request to be the first speaker. Francois, the platform is yours. You have 15 minutes to speak.
Thank you very much, Doctor. I'm not an expert on China like many of the other distinguished panelists, nor am I an expert on naval operation because looking at the map, it seems to me that an invasion of Taiwan by China would have to be seaborne, bringing men and cannons and tanks into Taiwan from the mainland China, along with an air support, of course, which the Chinese would provide. It seems to me from a logical point of view that before the invasion of Ukraine by Russia, this would have been a very likely scenario, especially now that the Chinese president, Mr. Jinping, is in difficulty because of riots against his zero COVID policy. So it would have been a diversion from his domestic problems to claim back Taiwan, as the Chinese have been for a long time saying that it's part of China and it should go back to China. I have no doubt that eventually, like they got Hong Kong and the Chinese will get back Taiwan. But at the moment, looking at the economic sanction that the West, particularly the US, has imposed upon Russia following their invasion of Ukraine, I'm a little doubtful that the Chinese president will risk now, at this moment, an invasion of Taiwan, though some of my panelists might disagree with that. The reason is that Chinese economy has taken a hit also, one, because of COVID, and two, because of the zero COVID policy of the Chinese president, which have put on hold a lot of the manufacturing and exporting of Chinese products. So at the moment, China is a little weak position, and I don't think that immediately they're going to invade Taiwan. So I hope my host is going to forgive me. I'm going to slightly divert from Taiwan. I think what is more likely is that the Chinese president would look for a limited war elsewhere, not Taiwan immediately. We know that Hong Kong, the Chinese have clamped further on Hong Kong, and at the moment they are having the upper hand in Hong Kong, so there is no revolt brewing. The Chinese president also was wise enough to loosen the grip on the zero COVID policy and allow some more freedom. So at the moment, he has some respite from his problem, his woes. So limited war with India would be more likely at the moment. If a war is going to happen, it will be a war in the Himalayan reaches, in Ladakh or Assam or elsewhere, higher place in the Himalayas, that the Chinese would like to teach a lesson to India. And then the president in this way would boost his reputation and give domestically, give something to cheer to the Chinese people. Taiwan is very important also because of Tibet. The Dalai Lama is, I know that we never talk about the Dalai Lama. I'm very fond of the gentleman. I have met him several times. As Dr. Adityanjee said, he came to our museum to inaugurate an exhibition on the Tibetan Holocaust. So I think that the Dalai Lama plays a very important role here, though he's not directly involved to Taiwan. He's been to Taiwan quite a few times, and he has a large following in Taiwan. And the Taiwanese have had the courage to receive him, which angered the Chinese government quite a lot. So, but the Dalai Lama is quite old now, he's 86. What happens when he dies? That's a source of worry to me, because I'm a lover of the Tibetan people, and I think Tibet was a buffer between India and China, and that is gone now. So when the Dalai Lama dies, not only it has repercussions in India, but also in Taiwan, because indirectly, through his peaceful creed and credo, he has been a supporter of Taiwan without politically saying so, but he's been to Taiwan. The Taiwan people worship him. So when he goes, it will not only be a blow to India, but also a blow to Taiwan, because there are not many, except for the US, and I'm a critic of the US, but I have to admire both Mr. Trump and Mr. Biden for giving support to Taiwan and warning the Chinese that if they ever attack Taiwan, there will be retribution from the US. Now, what's going to happen, I think, is more of a Chinese strengthening their hold in the China Sea, in the Indian Ocean, in the Spratly Islands, in preparation for that invasion of Taiwan, but also because they want to control these very important lanes, shipping lanes, that are vital not only for India, but also for the West. So this is what's going to happen. The China are going to engage into some saber rattling without involving Taiwan. They're going to threaten Taiwan, doing some naval exercises near Taiwan, overflowing Taiwan, sending missiles close to the Taiwan coast, and of course, strengthening their naval presence between the China Sea and the Indian Ocean. So this is a matter of worry for India. I do not think India is ready to have a, battle on the seas. I don't think that India has the clout and the navy to not only defend themselves against a Chinese naval attack, but also to come to the help of Taiwan in case of an invasion of Taiwan, which might happen a little later once the Russia-Ukraine conflict dies down or lessens. I would like to see a more aggressive China in the support of a more aggressive India in the support of Taiwan, because of course the Chinese are aggressing India in different places, not only in the sea but in the land and the mountains, claiming huge parts of India. So I would like to see a more aggressive India, both on the seas, on the land, but this is not happening. This is not happening. Also, India is also in a little bit weakened position because of its non-condemning of the Russian attack on Ukraine. And both the European Union and the United States are putting a lot of pressure on India. So in case of conflict between India and China, whether it is on the sea or on the land, I don't think India would get the support that it had before the Ukraine war, and that Ukraine war is so important. It's so important not only in terms of India, in terms of China, in terms of Taiwan, but generally to the world. It's an extremely important war. In my mind, it's going to reshape the entire world order. Now, in case there is a conflict between India and China, or in case India decides to help Taiwan to show a little more support to Taiwan, India will be in a weakened place because of its not condemning Russia, because of the pressure that is happening now on India to stop buying Russian oil, which, by the way, Europe is buying in huge quantities still. So Mr. Modi is there in a little difficult situation, and I think he should come more in support of Taiwan, more aggressive against China. But again, this is not happening. The Nehruvian external affairs policy are still governed by bureaucrats in Delhi, and Mr. Modi is in their hands, and he doesn't seem to be able to get out of that grip. So my conclusion is that there's not going to be an attack on Taiwan right now, because the Chinese know that they will face intense economic sanctions from the West, as it happened with Russia, but that the Chinese are going to strengthen their hold on the seas between the Chinese Sea and the Indian Ocean. They're also going to show a very aggressive attitude towards Taiwan, but not directly attack and invade Taiwan, but they might attack India because this is a weaker point, and they know that India will not get the world support that it would have got few months back, 1 year back, because of India's stand on the Russia-Ukraine war. So this is what I think, and I let my other distinguished panelists give me their opinion. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Francois, for your point of view. And it is an important point of view. And I think it's a very pragmatic point of view. So with that introduction from Francois, I would invite our second panelist, Dr. Swasti Rao. Dr. Rao, the floor is yours. Please go ahead.
Thank you so much, Dr. Adityanjee. And thank you, CSA, for inviting me. I think this is a debate which is pretty much hotly debated and discussed these days about China's belligerence to Taiwan, and especially in the context of what Russia has done to Ukraine. So obviously, I'm going to be linking the two areas of my expertise. I think you mentioned that I definitely, I specialized in the East Asian politics for a long time, and then while I was teaching, I started teaching and developed a course on European security, and that's what I work on primarily now. So what I'll be doing in my presentation today is that I'll be trying to draw some parallels. The speaker before me, I think, has rightly pointed out a few things that I agree to, but I'd like to go into a little more details of what I've been trying to find out from my research. So I think I'll try to be as brief as possible, and then we can elaborate during the question answer session. So, well, of course, Russia's invasion of Ukraine has also sparked an avalanche of discussions about its implications for Taiwan. And one of the most commonly discussed lessons from the Ukraine war has been that, China would need to think more seriously before waging a reunification war against Taiwan because of the setbacks that are suffered by the Russian invading forces. Now, this is something that we all know. What I've tried to do is that I've tried to unpack it, a little bit, and, in about 3-4 points, and then also mention certain possible scenarios that could emerge before I conclude. So, like the previous speaker has mentioned, in my understanding as well, the risk of Beijing launching a cross-strait war is not really high. And the lesson learned could be of little use, but then it doesn't really, I think it doesn't really hurt to discuss, it in little detail. So I have a few points to make in this regard. Like I said, that I'll be drawing a certain parallels. I'll be looking at certain similarities and differences that will better let us understand the possibilities and repercussions, lest the conflict spreads to a wider zone also. So to illustrate the differences, we need to draw certain parallels. What I've done is that, there's already a lot of work on it. I've also drawn on that work and I've built on that work. So one is, of course, trying to see what is this China versus Russia, understanding. Of course, these are different countries with different strategic designs, but then it kind of, helps to sort of put it into perspective with respect to their respective stance on Taiwan and Ukraine. I think there's also a bit of a parallel that needs to be drawn between Taiwan and Ukraine itself. Then what could be the role of the US and also the EU's, because I work on the European Union very closely, with respect to their strategic ambiguity on Taiwan. So it's not just the US, but also the EU that has strategic ambiguity on Taiwan. Now, US, if at all it would support, it would be more military in nature, but EU's, so to say, strategic ambiguity is centering more around its economic relations with China. So, and these two are, of course, top 2 economic partners for China as well. So I've tried to sort of unpack that a little bit, and especially that of the EU's, because I feel that's not really better understood. A lot of times we are only just discussing about the US angle. Third, I will be discussing the role of sanctions and China's fear of the secondary sanctions. And I feel this is an extremely important point, because while we all know that China's economic personality sort of hinders, its ability to help Russia, but at the same time, it also becomes useful to understand that so far, and now the war is into its 10th month, China has not done a single thing, to circumvent the sanctions by the West. And that also tells us a lot about their no-limit friendship. So that is my next point, which is that what is the limits to the no-limits friendship between China and Russia? I will be talking about certain banks financing, cases, and where some other areas where the cooperation is restricted. And then I'll be talking about the scope of a wider conflict. I'll be talking about a few more things, and then I'll be pointing out some caveats. Now, the first thing, like I said, is that, of course, China is not Russia. They have different strategic priorities. China is the second largest GDP in the world. It is about 76%. Its GDP is about 76% of United States, etc. It's the world's factory, etc. Militarily, of course, Russia maintains the world's largest nuclear arsenal. And, in terms of the number of nuclear warheads or formidable conventional force, especially its land force, Ukraine is primarily a theater for land force, where Russia would be more capable of showing its strength than, say, in a maritime theater. Now, if you compare this with China's situation, China's military has been experiencing fast modernization, but it's still many decades behind that of the United States. And as we all know, that China started modernizing its Navy and Air Force about late 90s. And after the 96 Taiwan Straits crisis, particularly, And also, like Russia, China's land forces were traditionally stronger than its naval and air forces, though China is working hard to sort of build that, bring that up. And I'm sure Commodore Vasan is going to throw more light on this. Now, Taiwan is definitely going to be a very complicated target also as for an invasion. I mean, I keep hearing a lot of analysis floating about the possible scenarios of how China is planning to invade Taiwan, and there's a three-pronged strategy, etc. I'm not really a military strategist, so I've kind of left that out from my presentation for today. But I mean, I'm aware of that. Having said that, Taiwan is definitely a pretty complicated target for an invasion because while the Taiwan Strait is pretty narrow, it's about 100 miles and less at its narrowest part. And China has been deploying a large number of missiles also, but it would not be easy. Okay, and not just that, also given the large number of advanced weapon systems that Taiwan has imported from the US, and also, I mean, a point that I would be talking about later, which is to do with the asymmetric warfare. I don't think it's it's so easy to really invade Taiwan, for China. And the other thing is that what makes this scenario more complicated, and this is perhaps the most important part of my presentation today, is that in the context of a potential Taiwan Strait war, whatever I've been mentioning all this while, this becomes even more complicated because it is interconnected to, China's economy is interconnected with the world, and it is a double-edged sword for China. So on the one hand, it has been one of the most crucial factors which has promoted China's economic growth for decades. And on the other hand, this deep economic interdependence brings a certain vulnerabilities, to China's growth in times of crisis. Now, this particular thing Russia did not have, only because Russia was not even a big economy as that of China's, and not just because of that, but also because of the number of countries that it does trade with. I mean, there's like no comparison. China is definitely far more embedded in the global supply chains and compared to Russia. So that really gives a different kind of a spin to this entire debate. So like I said, China is the largest trading country in the world. China largely trades with the US and the EU and other US's key allies. So in a scenario where China is using force to achieve reunification with Taiwan, of course, harsh sanctions would be imposed, and it would be really very costly for the Chinese economy if that happens. And while, of course, there is understanding as to, why it would hurt the Chinese economy, the sheer evidence that China has not done a single action to circumvent the Western sanctions put up on Russia also shows that China is extremely serious about this, because that would lead to a serious economic downturn, and it is going to have profound social and political implications domestically as well. And then I was reading some analysis by the Japanese expert Yasuhiro Matsuda, and he's pretty discerning when it comes to China-Taiwan relations, because he's an expert there. And even in his analysis, I saw that if there's one lesson that China has learned from what Russia is doing in Ukraine, is that that economic impact of the sanctions that have been slapped on Russia, the magnitude of the sanctions which have been slapped on Russia. I mean, China, in no way can China really afford that, all the jingoistic rhetoric that Xi Jinping keeps whipping up, all of that aside. So the harsh sanctions is definitely a reality, and you can't. I mean, China wouldn't really dare to do that. And then, well, like I said, that it has Russia, by contrast, had to fear less, because obviously Russia is not really that dependent. I wouldn't go into details of Russia. If anybody wants to understand the nitty-gritties of the Russian trade volumes with the EU, for example, the energy trade is pretty much under consideration these days, especially after the oil sanctions and the price cap. I mean, I'm willing to take that question later. And so let me come to my next point quickly, which is that you see, China and Russia also differ in the strategic priorities. So I think for Russia's, when you're looking at comparing the two scenarios, I think Russia's invasion of Ukraine was more to do with the fact that, Putin, at least he said so, he wanted to secure the countries near abroad, because of the eastward expansion of NATO. I mean, I don't agree with that argument, but nonetheless, that's how it was projected. Now, the point is that by contrast, now China's strategic priority is still maintaining a peaceful environment which is conducive to China's economic growth. And the other thing was to keep the jingoistic rhetoric working, right, or at least well oiled. China could sort of break into little skirmishes along the borders just to keep the attention of its neighbors occupied, etc. I mean, I agree with that point. But like a full-fledged war, a full-fledged invasion is something that I find it a little too far-fetched. Anyway, so now let us come to this idea of US involvement and the strategic ambiguity factor that I was talking about. Now, obviously, while there is a lot of, ambiguity on that, but then actually what you really, the more you try to understand the layers of what it means that US is going to be strategically ambiguous, I think what it is that nobody really knows, what US is really going to do. So US made it very clear in the case of Ukraine that it is not going to be sending troops on the ground. But for example, the role of US intelligence is really pretty successful when it comes to analyzing how Ukraine and its air force, etc., have been pretty successful in countering certain, Russian attacks and, for example, intercepting their missiles and drones. So the role of, American intelligence is one. And then as to what really the strategic ambiguity really means, I think it's a larger question. For the paucity of time, I can't really get deeper into it. But it really is a question mark. Nobody really knows what it means. And similarly, when it comes to the EU as well, EU also maintains a strategic ambiguity when it comes to Taiwan. Obviously, European Union, is not really a military power, but in the case of a supposed attack or something, it will definitely send, of course, first apply sanctions, and also the nature of aid or the nature of intelligence. I mean, those are things which are really not understood very well, and they are left to interpretation. So these are things that we need to keep in mind when we are talking about two of its topmost trading partners' reactions, to a likely attack on Taiwan. Then now let me come to the more interesting part that I have been researching on, which is that, I mean, to what extent can China and Russia help each other? I mean, because in today's times, and especially when just before the war broke out in Ukraine, there was this huge hullabaloo about how Russia and China have a no limits friendship. And what the war has actually shown is that this, China's decision to cooperate with the West is coming at the cost of its no limits friendship with Russia, no matter what, in what way you would like to see it. Okay, it really is coming at the cost of, its relationship with Russia. And I think therein Xi Jinping's administration has taken a few important decisions, and I'll give you some. Okay, so for example, the first thing was that Russia had really hoped, to secure a kind of a boost in military provisions from China, but that crumbled pretty early on in the war. And again, the reasons being secondary sanctions, of course. Now, on the contrary, while Zelensky, kept receiving ample military aid and humanitarian aid, financial aid, etc., from allies in Europe and America, President Putin largely has remained isolated from international support. I mean, what countries are supporting Russia today? I mean, the rogue states, North Korea, they wanted to buy rockets and artillery and ammunition from North Korea, and then Iran, right? So these are, I mean, it's no way, like one could have earlier imagined that China would do nothing to sort of support their all-weather ally and a friend with no limits, etc. So I think that has pretty much proved to be a part of rhetoric than reality. And then there are other two examples I would discuss very quickly. I think I'm out of time. I'm not sure how much time is left, but then I'll just try to wrap up quickly. So one is that you see, we saw very early on in the war that China's banks, for instance, they just stopped cooperating with Russian banks, and no official statement was given, but it all just came out to the same thing, that it's temporary, withheld, it's temporary, put on hold, but that is just continuing, and the war has been continuing for 10 months. So you can totally see that China has really come out as a very pragmatic player. And why do I sort of focus so much on this particular thing? Is because it kind of somewhere shows as to how pragmatic China really is in times of a real test. Because Russia's war with Ukraine was something which was, if you, I mean, it's like it's kind of it's a kind of a picture perfect scenario for China to undermine and subvert the influence of the West, right? So, but then because Xi Jinping's administration has come come out in such pragmatic ways also gives us a good insight into understanding why or why not, or why not would they be planning, and what would they be planning for Taiwan. So that was one. And the other important thing which nobody really talks about is that the Russia-China cooperation, which was growing by leaps and bounds in the area of space, space militarization and space research, has also been halted. Okay, so there is a lot of literature available on it, and because it's still something which is a work in progress, so not a lot of things are said, and also because Chinese don't really make any statement about it, but it is a fact that all of that has halted. So if there's this man who's being so pragmatic about the fear of secondary sanctions, we can totally infer from this behavior as to how his how his decisions would be when it comes to Taiwan. Now, that was the second thing. Now, obviously, all this is happening because of the fear of secondary sanctions. In the context of the EU, let us also remember that, China's ambitions about the BRI, the New Silk Road, etc., they were already suffering a lot of setbacks in Eastern Europe. And, China-EU trade deal, that there's a trade and investment deal which has been stuck over certain issues about Uyghur, exploitation and Uyghur rights, etc. And some EU parliamentarians have been sanctioned because of that. So these kind of things are extremely, I would say, important for China when it comes to setting its strategic designs, right? I mean, China really can't afford that. I mean, and think of a situation where in the US, if Trump comes back, okay, and he says that fine, like, let's just sort of you remember the famous trade war that happened under Trump. So I mean, then who is China left with? I mean, the topmost trading partner is one is US and one is the EU, right? So then what do? They can't really risk, okay, in the face of so many problems that are already existing, they can't really risk to sort of, I would say, deteriorate it further, because these are extremely important things. And, I told you about the trade deal. The Chinese Confucius Institutes are closing down all over Europe, except, of course, for Hungary. And Hungary, of course, if somebody wants to know why is Hungary special, I'll tell them. And 5G has been blocked. Huawei has been blocked. Strategic technologies have been blocked. So they are only interested in, of course, trade is important for both sides, but trade of what type? Now, trade when it comes to like simple manufactured goods, like, Christmas trees and apparel and all of that, it's absolutely fine. But the European Union is extremely sensitive now, post-Russia, about creating dependencies, and they are also doing a lot of things. So, you don't really just take the German Chancellor's visit to China on face value. There is a lot more which is happening behind the scenes when it comes to controlling China in terms of, strategic technologies, etc. So, the only area where cooperation has increased between China and Russia has been the oil sector. China is now, I think, buying about 2 million barrels of oil per day, and but there is a catch there. Ever since the caps have arrived and oil has been banned, in Europe, Russian oil has been banned. Actually, what it means for countries like China and India and Turkey, who are buying a lot of oil from Russia, it basically entails that this group of countries would be in a better position to negotiate more discounts. And if you go through, I mean, I was reading a few reports from Bloomberg, etc. They have already started to negotiate for more discounts than they were already getting. And also, all this pressure from this uncertainty that has been brought in. So it would not hamper the sales so much, but the kind of money that Russia was earning from it, that also is questionable. And one would not expect a friend to do it, right? So again, there is pragmatism. So the point that I want to come back to again and again is that there is again this show of pragmatism which has come from the Chinese side, which is, like I said, very discerning when it comes to understanding the larger strategic designs. Now, not just that, also there is a problem that China has been facing domestically, which has been the problems of the zero COVID policy. It has weakened the country's economy. The demand for crude oil has gone down. So even there, how much oil will they buy? There would be limits. Then, of course, if I would like to conclude, I just say that definitely, I would say in some ways, Taiwan is going to be more important to the US interests than Ukraine, because there, you have, of course, there is this grand game of the great power rivalry being unfolded there as well. But definitely Taiwan is going to be more important to the US. Look at how the Indo-Pacific Command is important, how US is pushing for more cooperation in the Indo-Pacific, all of that. So that might kind of spark a more direct response. Now, whether it'll be military or not, I don't think any one of us in a position to say that. I don't think it is going to be directly military, but that it is going to be significant enough. And then, of course, the economic sanctions are discussed. And China has more to lose economically than Russia if it alienates the US and its allies, especially the European Union. Now, despite these deterrents, I think Russia's war in Ukraine may still have emboldened Chinese president to pursue his ambition to seize the island. And, things could just be all about the right timing, because no matter how ill-timed we feel the Russian attack on Ukraine was, but then if you go back to February 2022 or the end of 2021, I think the world at that time and the geopolitical realities at that time were so that perhaps Vladimir Putin thought that he could get away, with a war like that. So I think timing is also going to be key, and will also tell us a little more about how Xi Jinping, looks at Taiwan in coming whatever months and perhaps years. But yes, I can't really deny that possibility, however. But the other thing is that in terms of the security environment around China, because I think that today's seminar is about how it's going to spill over and the wider impact of the conflict. I think especially Japan, it has really China's, ambitions with respect to Taiwan and its activities, especially about violating Taiwan's airspace, etc. And also Japan's, of course, China and Japan have an island dispute, of course. So it has also changed Japan's security doctrine in an extremely fundamental manner. It's made it more realist, and this particular trend is only going to go stronger, not just because of Taiwan or the problem of the the problems of the Senkaku, but also because of what is definitely happening in the world. So, I think countries all around have become much more realist in their strategic world outlook than they were earlier. So this is going to be an important thing. And you see, Xi Jinping is known to divert Chinese public's attention from domestic problems to security issues by whipping up this particular jingoistic narrative. He's done that earlier. And with the COVID lockdown measures going the wrong side, the Chinese streets were recently flooded, with an uprising that we saw for the first time after 1989. So, I could expect Xi to balance that out by asserting the nationalistic claims again of that grand China reunification plan, or, to retain that public support that he seems to be, if not really losing out on, but at least it is a little shaky, So that definitely have to be supported by better economic performance back home. And with respect to India, and that is my final point. With respect to India, the one thing is that we should be expected, like the speaker before me said, for a little more skirmishes. Because one of the plans that China has with respect to India is to keep us, engulfed in our problems on the border, so that we don't have the resources and the time and attention to divert it outside in the Indo-Pacific, for instance. So we could expect that, not a full-fledged war, but something to that tune, one. And B, when the war had started and when India refused to condemn Russia for its actions in Ukraine, and I'm pointing it out very specifically because not just the speaker before me said this, but it also initially, not now, but initially in the initial months, that really sort of emboldened China to come out with, we had lots of these discussions with the Chinese think tanks, and they were always very keen, on trying to capitalize on this trilateral, the Russia, India, China trilateral against the West. It was always the Chinese plan, and we always sensed it all the time, right? That, so they are trying to say that, now we really appreciate the fact that you did not fall, into the West's lap and did not toe the line that they drew for you, and we really appreciate that, etc., etc. So we always felt, and that's an important point that I also sensed, is that I was in this seminar where the Chinese were really, going gaga over the strategic autonomy of the Indian foreign policy, and said it is just the right time and we expect India to be very pragmatic. But, the point is that that particular ambition, I think what India needs to be careful about, India has done it definitely, but what India needs to be more careful about, that if the war stretches on longer, I feel that the Chinese excitement about supporting Russia has already gone bust. I mean, it does not exist. We saw that. Similarly, in a parallel, I think what India needs to also make sure and maintain that position. Not that India has not done it, but has to maintain that position. That India is not really a part of that covert plan to challenge West's hegemony or something. I mean, India is just putting its. We are buying oil because we're getting it cheap, right? We are not doing it because we share the Chinese or the Russian, so to say, ambitions to check US hegemony or something. So I think that Russia, India, China trilateral enthusiasm that China really tried to push academically, as I mean, in the strategic circles, I think that also has been a lot of times it has been sort of busted by by the Indian scholars, a lot of them. But I think that is some place where we need to be more consistent, so that I think China does not really misinterpret that India's decision to not criticize Russia for its actions in Ukraine is tantamount to sharing that worldview that the two countries have. And it is why I say it is important is because in my experience of interacting with a whole host of Europeans after the war started, I think ever since I think perhaps like say last 2 months, 3 months, I have noticed this
Can you
very
conclude,
noticeable
please?
change. Yeah, I'll just wrap up. That they understand it better. When earlier they were very bitter on India not really coming out and criticizing Russia. Now they've become much more understanding. So the RIS, this trilateral ambition that perhaps China thought would be a very smart thing to do, is not really happening. So and then I look forward to the questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Dr. Swasti Rao, for a brilliant and highly nuanced analysis of a very complex problem. I must say this is the first time you are on our platform, and we'll hope that you will continue to come in future programs and enlighten us and our audience with your incisive analysis. Now, I invite our final speaker, Commodore Vasan, who has been on our platform several times, has participated in roundtable discussions as well as given distinguished orations. Commodore R. Vasan, the floor is yours, sir. Please go ahead.
Thank you, Dr. Adityanjee. It's always a great pleasure and honor for me to be here because these are well conducted, they're time bound, and there's so much that we can take back home. Since Mr. Gautier may have to leave, I just wanted to respond to one or two points that he's made about the the relative strength, capacity of Indian Navy and China Navy, PLA Navy. So I can assure Mr. Gautier that we are, actually blessed by geography, and with the Eastern Fleet and the Western Fleet, and our outposts which are in Andaman Nicobar. China will have to think 3 times or 4 times before they can venture into any kind of ambitious, adventure in Indian Ocean region. It's the only ocean that's named after India, and we have our strengths here. So I'm not too really worried about the Chinese Navy, honestly. Also, please remember that when they have South China Sea and so many disputes out there, even if they have today numerically a navy superior than America, but they have to commit something like 40-50% of their naval fleet in South China Sea and in the Indo-Pacific. That's an important factor that we should not lose sight of, which is the reason why they are coming into Gadar, to Hambantota and other places here, to be able to overcome this, what I always refer to as tyranny of distance. That's just by way of, responding to Mr. Gautier, who may have to leave early, to say that I'm really not too concerned about the so-called numerical superiority of China. But yes, we must be on guard all the time, and we can't take things for granted, because they always surprise us. So I must thank both the previous speakers for laying out the canvas, which makes it easy for me to perhaps be more specific on today's topic. Let's identify some of the challenges that are there. The biggest challenge, as I see it, is the famous 1992 resolution, by the United Nations, the resolution 2758, which virtually said that there's only one China. And of course, there was a certain amount of ambiguity that was there in the statement, which is being used by both sides. And as far as China is concerned, they have no doubts that Taiwan is part of China. And whereas the so-called resolution 2758 clearly talks about the authority being now given to PRC, and those who were with Chiang Kai-shek by name, not as ROC or Taiwan, being displaced, etc., etc. So this has complicated matters there, which has also led to the word that was used by Dr. Swasti Rao on strategic ambiguity. It's being used by America, it's being used by others who are watching Taiwan, and it's perhaps even being used by many other observers in European Union. The people are quite clear are the Chinese. It's very, very clear in their mind as to what is the status of Taiwan. Not necessary that we need to agree with that. The latest white paper that they brought out, makes it very clear as to how they want to deal with Taiwan. So they said, that we will, there is no question of, they also quoted the UN Security Council Article 2758 and said, as per this, there's only one China. And we cannot have one China and one Taiwan. They made it very clear in the white paper, which runs many pages. I'm sure it can be read by people who are more interested in looking at and read between the lines. So what has been clearly said is that we will try and carry out the reunification based on a peaceful proposition, and also to try and see whether they can be brought to which is something that has also been recommended by the KMT particularly, the other party which is now trying to contest the elections in 2024. But I have been to Taiwan on 3-4 occasions, and the sentiment there is very clear. We will fight to the last man if there is an invasion. That is the national spirit which is there. It's a percentage of people who still perhaps look for connections in the mainland, maybe from KMT. Apparently, according to some statistics, about 5 to 10% who want this kind of a unification with mainland, based on historical so-called relations. But if you look at the last 100 years of history, China has never ruled Taiwan. It was with Japan before the World War, and it was handed over. And thereafter, after the 1949, when the Communist Party virtually drove out Chiang Kai-shek, they became ROC. In fact, till the United Nations Security Council seat was given to PRC or taken away from Taiwan, all the powers in international institutions were with Taiwan and not with China. So, at one level, you can say the rest of the world conspired, maybe because of the size and stature of China, which had to be integrated into the global system, where they took away a lot of things. And, the statistics tell you that there are only about 14 countries who have diplomatic relations with Taiwan. The rest of us have, of course, the deal with them through the TECC, etc., etc. So I think for us, what is clear is to look at this white paper, which has come out, but also the kind of responses which have been made by USA, both from Trump and Biden. The last 4 statements that were made by Biden, appears to be a policy shift. This is something that observers look at. So there is a policy shift. It will say we will defend Taiwan. Of course, it's a different matter that every time he's made that statement or something to that effect, the State Department comes out with some kind of a denial to say, no, we respect the one China policy, etc., etc., but we do not want use of force. So there are, again, going back to the word that was used by Dr. Swasti Rao, that is what defines the American response, the strategic ambiguity. So increasingly people are saying maybe there is clarity in the present government's thinking, but they intentionally would not like to say that will directly intervene. So the only time this happened perhaps when USA intervened directly was in 96, when there was a presidential form of election in Taiwan. And that is when, they sent a carrier fleet. And that was there in Taiwan Straits. And so therefore, the whatever was expected did not happen. Even here, but for the Russia-Ukraine war, there were a lot of expectations that Taiwan would be run over before the 20th Congress, because Xi Jinping wanted to do what others had not been able to. So I think the Russia-Ukraine war has put paid to his ambitions at that time. But it's very clear, like a lot of us continue to say, it's not just a question of if. There's no if there, it's only when will this happen. And if that happens, what would be the response of the rest of the world, and what would be the response of America? Because I think the entire thing hinges on how USA would support or not support. Just as it's happening in Ukraine war, if US decides to only support it remotely by providing weapons, equipment, intelligence, etc., but have no boots on the ground. It is left to the last Taiwanese to defend his homeland. So it will again be perhaps another protracted land. Also the analysis of the topography, etc., clearly takes on. It's not an easy thing. It's not a cakewalk for even China to come there. So on that point, some of the analysis that's coming out is to say that Taiwan should not try to deal with China on a conventional platform, because you are very weak. You can't fight the Chinese Navy with just 4 submarines. When you look at the relative strengths, Taiwan is it's no comparison. Therefore, they need to have denial weapons of a different stature altogether. Maybe they have to add a lot more submarines. Maybe they have to have mine countermeasures. So therefore, it is the very composition of Taiwan that today is trying to deal with China on a conventional manner, and that's not going to work for Taiwan. So they really need to be thinking out of the box to see how they can defend their homeland. So global support is crucial, and there is also a certain amount of change in the attitude of even European Union. So it's the strong linkages and the bonding that exists between China and European Union that would come in the way of any kind of direct support being extended to Taiwan. I do not see the European Union or European naval forces maneuvering in the Indo-Pacific in support of Taiwan. Nor would India do it. It's very clear, because there is no pact that we have, unlike USA, which has a pact. No other nation has a pact to support Taiwan. But that factor must be always borne in mind. So even if India has to support, it would perhaps do it the same way that the West is doing in the case of Ukraine, by providing, intelligence, providing support, providing monetary things, etc. Other thing which actually complicates matters for China is the fact that the whole world is dependent on the technical capability of Taiwan. Whether it's the semiconductors, whether it's the kind of printed boards, or whether it's the kind of advances that they have made in various sectors, health sector, transportation sector, green energy. All this is something that has complicated China's calculations, because with the semiconductor policy of America, you find that Taiwan's hands are being strengthened, and Taiwan is consciously trying to move away from China's grips. That is a factor that would obviously complicate matters for China, because it will not only hit China, but it will also hit the rest of the world if Taiwan, gets into a war situation where the semiconductor production is affected seriously. So these are factors that would come in the way of a direct invasion. In my own assessment, it's very clear that China always works to some kind of a time frame. So 2024 is the next election. And some of the local elections today in Taiwan have thrown up KMT candidates. So they would like to see how the 2024 election takes place, whether KMT or some people who are sympathetic can be brought into the government. They're capable of doing it. They have many sympathizers in Taiwan. It's not that, all of them, all the 100% are supporting the present government of DPP on that side, though she's been an excellent leader. But the point is that they will continue to be sympathized. People can be bought by money, and everything is there. And therefore, this is something that they have to look at to say whether. So we are into 22. We are just moving into 23. China has nothing to lose by waiting till 2024. So they would like to see, and also work to see, that they have the KMT coming into power, because they have always been sympathetic to the unification process, which has been put on. So China also would have learned the lessons from the Russia-Ukraine war. They cannot afford a protracted war. Very simple. You can't have a 10-month-long war, which China's economy is already going down, and there are a lot of domestic challenges which he has to sort out, not just the protests for COVID, but also the banking, the real estate, and other areas which are of serious concern to the leadership. All right, he's been now anointed as the king for life, but there are these voices of dissent which he has to manage, and that's not going to be easy. So I may also slightly disagree with the first speaker on whether China will get into some kind of a mode to deal with India, because so far it has been perhaps winning some of these battles and wars without a single shot being fired. This is the salami slicing tactics and all that which we discussed in some of our previous sessions. So as long as it's in a position to keep us engaged along the border with 60,000 troops seeing eye to eye. We are also not sleeping there. Now we have built up our infrastructure. We are perhaps in the last 2 years reinforced our mechanisms, and we are in a better position to deal with Chinese, and Chinese are aware of this. And also, while we are not going to have American, European boots on the ground in Himalaya, notwithstanding the exercise that we recently conducted, full range of intelligence, equipment, weaponry will all be made available to China, India. That I have no doubts. Because between India and China, if they have to choose, they are not going to choose China because of various reasons which are there, which are historical in nature. So, India has to be cautious in its approach to capitalizing on the global environment, which has also been discussed here in this forum, and to play its cards wisely. I think so far they've done well in telling the West that look, you cannot have double standards. You can't be importing 6 times of our energy products in a day and then blame India for not saying a word about Russia. So these are some of the things which I think the government has to manage under the ambit of strategic autonomy. I think we've done fairly well in putting it on our carrying it on our chest. And so this is where I would like to say that we should not go purely by the relative strength of Taiwan's military versus PLA. We should also look at the kind of support that is likely to come, the terrain that is there which will make it difficult for China to move in, the international climate that China would have taken note of to say that it's not going to be a cakewalk. This must be re-emphasized. While the desire to take over Taiwan is there, when they know that something like only 5 or 10% are China sympathizers, it is going to be extremely difficult. And China is reinforcing its complete defense mechanism. The number of reserve people are more than what China has. And that we should not purely look at only the numbers. If only the numbers won wars, Russia would have won the war long ago. It would have not taken 10 months for Russia to carry on with this without knowing where the end is. So this is where lessons have been learned by international players. People are closely monitoring the methodology, the modus operandi of how Ukraine was supported. Taiwan would likewise be supported. I have no doubts in my mind that it would be supported. And this is where there is perhaps a certain amount of scope for Taiwan to continue. From Taiwan's point of view, they also would not like a war. They also would like to continue with this status quo, which is they already been independent for 100 years. We're talking about an independence, creating an independence. They already been independent. They're not under the control of China. So, and also looking at what's happened to Hong Kong, where everyone said, it will be one country and two systems. It has not happened. On the contrary, every kind of liberty has been taken away from people in Hong Kong. New kind of orders have been issued in Hong Kong. So it's just become another state of China. So whatever was promised in the handover treaty to the UK has not been complied with. So Taiwan would be even more wary of the so-called pronunciations which have been made by China to say, when Taiwan is integrated, they can have their own system, they can have their own procedures, etc. But it is not going to happen. You saw what happened in Hong Kong. Some of these dissenters and over there, they passed special laws, and they were deported to China. So there are always doubts also about whether they will also have some indoctrination camps if Taiwan is taken over later. So these are real hard concerns, and we need to contend with this. And when you are looking at the kind of belligerence that China is doing, China is also indulging in a lot of psyops. The psyops have been phenomenal, and therefore many volunteers in Taiwan have taken up this cause of even the Times of India, and India has done that, of examining some of the reports which are made and saying whether it's fact or whether it's a propaganda. So some of these have taken up. So there's a phenomenal amount of effort. Taiwan has also started strengthening their cyber capability because there have been frequent attacks. The number of attacks have gone up. That is the scenario today. So it's something that we need to watch out. It's something that we need to support Taiwan morally, ethically, and for the reason that, like I said, for 100 years, you've not ruled a country. So just by quoting something which happened or because of a loose statement that was made by 2758, you can't say that, we will allow this to happen. So the rest of the world will be found guilty if they allow this to happen. So US obviously is in the lead position. So a lot depends on the nature of leadership that USA would have, whether it's Trump or Biden or whoever comes there, to see that they honor their commitments to ensure that there is no forceful takeover of Taiwan. So with that, I think I will stop here and allow some questions so that anything that's not been covered can be taken on. Thank you. Jai Hind.
Thank you, Commodore Vasan. It's always a pleasure to listen to you, your military and strategic and maritime analysis. I think you bring very value to this discussion. So we are ready for taking questions, and I am looking at the chat function. There are a number of questions, and I will read few of them. So the first question has indirectly and directly been answered, but for the sake of formality, I'll put it again. And it is from Mr. Narayan Kumar. In the event of an invasion of Taiwan, will EU or other members of the international community be inclined to impose sanctions on Beijing, considering the economic interdependence that exists between the West and China? I know Dr. Rao did answer that, and so did Commodore Vasan. But let's have a formal response to this question. I'll start with Dr. Rao.
Well, thank you. And first of all, I was expecting Mr. Narayan Kumar to ask that question. He's a very keen observer. I have, interacted with him on other different platforms as well. And he's always his questions are very, I would say, piercing. And so the short answer to your question, sir, is that yes. If in case of that kind of an attack, or even not really that big an attack, even if it is like a smaller attack or something, there will be sanctions that will be slapped up. There is economic interdependence, yes, and I went into the nitty-gritties of a lot of things about that equation. I told you that on the one hand, where the EU is really having to fend for itself after cutting down energy imports from Russia, and how it is impacting their economy, right, and their industrial closures. It is a fact, nobody can deny that. But at the same time, so EU wants to keep up this trade relationship with Russia, with China. But on the other hand, the EU trade and investment deal with China is stuck because of sanctions over the Uyghur issue. And then secondly, like I said, that China's Belt and Road Initiative projects have been failing pretty consistently in Eastern Europe. And they have already been blocked out when it comes to strategic and sensitive technologies like the 5G, all of that has already gone. So with that, if you are discussing a probable scenario over Taiwan, yes, it is going to be followed by sanctions. It will obviously hurt the EU as well, but yes, there will be sanctions. So we cannot really say that no, the EU, just because it's economically so sensitive and vulnerable right now, would not slap up sanctions. No, that is not going to happen, because understand, the EU is going to be working in coordination with the US, because it's the US and its allies, and with all the. And also, I'll tell you the other reason why the EU will slap up sanctions is because, you see, the US and all the military aid that has been coming from the US to Ukraine, I mean, it would not have been possible had it not been for the US, right? I mean, EU has only been given humanitarian aid, largely. It's just the US and the UK that have been giving the military aid, okay? So it is also in terms of that give and take, right? So in case, because Taiwan and that security architecture is so important for the US and also the NATO, because I didn't have time to make that argument that with the Russian war in Ukraine, what has happened is that there has been a kind of a merging of these two security, erstwhile, unrelated security theaters, which is the transatlantic and the Indo-Pacific. So NATO has been calling out against China, etc. So there is no no way that US is not going to then pressurize its allies to slap up the similar sanctions against China. I mean, that security theater is very important for US's preeminence and its interests. So yes, there will be sanctions, yes.
Thank you, Dr. Rao. May I invite Commodore Vasan? Same question, please.
I tend to agree with Dr. Swasti Rao. Only I would like to amplify by saying that the scenario building would have already been done. And they would know exactly which are the sectors in which they can apply sanctions, punish China, but get away with this. So what I refer to is the technological areas. That is where they still have a lead. Both US and EU have lead, and they can punish China by imposing sanctions with technological regimes. She mentioned 5G and Huawei. So these are things which are already hurting them. So, so obviously there are areas in which you can definitely hurt China. China is aware of this. China are the land of very wise people. We should not assume that they don't know what is happening to them. They would have carried out likewise a complete kind of analysis to say which are the areas where they'll be, sanctioned. Should they get into this misadventure either with India or with Taiwan? More so in the respect of Taiwan, because that's something that's on the agenda right now. So yes, I agree with Dr. Rao's assessment, and like I said, the priority will be on all technological areas of engagement which will be stopped, and any kind of because that is something which will not affect you; it will affect China more. So you would rather like to impose sanctions in areas which will hurt your adversary. I think that's what will happen.
I think I agree with both of you. I think you are seeing already a regime of pre-sanction sanctions being enacted against China for its belligerence. And you are seeing actually curtailment of actually activity in technological dimension. Dr. Rao had said that yes, the trade will continue in apparel and plastic toys and things like that. But as far as high-end technology with dual uses, both US and EU, US, for last 4 or 6 years, and EU has got awakened to this, threat now, so have imposed those sanctions. So you are already seeing slow motion sanctions in a preventive manner. But if there was a hot war, yes, there will be definitely sanctions. Next question in the chat function, and I'm going to paraphrase that because it's a lengthy kind of question. It's from Ronan J. And basically the gist of question is that India has never tried to block the economic rise of China, whereas China has done for India. And tying that with the Beltway politics, that recently there was a bill in US Congress about, economic sanctions on China. Indian diplomats and Indian lobbying firm in Washington, D.C. did not support that. And the question is why India does not take economic sanctions on China much more aggressively. Maybe I'll start with Commodore Vasan on this first. Commodore Vasan.
Yeah, I know this is a very interesting question because after the standoff in 2020, when you look at the trade balance between India and China, it's only growing. Notwithstanding the statements that are made to say that it will not be business as usual, unless we restore status quo, the ground situation is different. We are having a huge trade deficit and it's only growing. We carried out an analysis recently on the kind of the nature of imports that is taking place and which are crucial. Some of these will have to continue, notwithstanding this, this big talk about delinking from China, because for 60 years they have virtually, managed to be at the center of the entire supply chain, global supply chain systems. And it's not just India. Every other country is also equally affected because they virtually took over the entire range of operations, including in critical areas. Heavy machinery today in India is imported from them. Electrical machinery is imported from them, even today. So, therefore, when you talk about the sanctions or, having a higher pitch to say that, we must have sanctions, etc., it works both ways. So, I suppose the policymakers in India have said, let's keep these statements, but let this go on till we delink totally. And that's not going to happen overnight. It will take you at least 10 years for you to decouple from the established systems. We are doing it. But it's not going to happen today. It's not going to happen tomorrow. So what do you do in the interim if you want to sustain your GDP? The GDP has to be sustained only when with the help of some of this critical equipment that is required for our industry. But if you wanted to now start becoming a manufacturing hub, where is all that going to come initially? Later on, it may come from other sources. But for 5 to 10 years, 10 years, I would say 7 to 10 years is the time that is crucial for India to be able to stand on its own, notwithstanding the statements about Atmanirbharata, indigenization. All this is good. But today, when you analyze it, you find that we still require some of the imports, both from the West, from Russia, from China, from other sources, to be able to ensure that we are stand on our own in 7 to 10 years.
Dr.
Also add
Rao,
to this.
please go ahead, Dr. Rao.
Yeah, so I think the question was, I think there is some echoing. Am I audible
No, echo, Dr.
I
Rao.
will request everyone to kindly mute themselves because
themselves?
echo
Yes.
comes, and I am
Yeah.
muting myself.
Okay, fine. So I think the question that was asked was that why doesn't India impose sanctions on China, despite the border standoff, etc. The two ways to look at it. Okay, one is that you see, with the kind of a trade imbalance that we have with China, I mean, our trade has already crossed 100 billion already, and if you look at the deficit, it's 75 billion, okay, dollars of deficit. Now, when you're looking at the trade volumes, now India is having, if you look at the total percentage of where China really stands in terms of India's trading, is many times more than than where India stands in China's trading. Okay, so that's like a very small percentage. So if we were to impose sanctions, it would only hurt us. Okay, see, it would work when we have a balance of trade. Okay, where, for example, the way it has been with US, or the way it's been with the EU countries, for example, okay, where China also stands to lose from the sanctions, only then the sanctions make sense. Otherwise, it does not make any sense. So that's one way to look at it. The second way to look at it is that India is trying to not really counter China economically or balance China economically by way or the philosophy of sanctions. What India is trying to do is to form these many, several parallel platforms that can help building resilience in supply chains. And the impact of it, the final impact of it will be that the world is going to be less dependent on China. That is the only way you can look at China. There cannot be, decoupling. It is about China plus one. It is about, trying to find ways and means to make your supply chains and manufacturing more resilient. So these are the two parallel tracks on which, India thinks, because it does not make any sense for India to have sanctions. Otherwise, if it was making sense for India to impose sanctions, India would have done that, definitely. But it does not make sense.
Thank you, Dr. Rao. And certainly, India should not get involved in the domestic legislation of United States targeting a third country. And that's a very important principle for India's policy planners. So that is, India should not get sucked into that process and not become, a kind of camp follower for any country whatsoever. There are a lot of questions, so I will, compress the questions and combine them. But I do want to take a question here from Mr. Nilekani. Taiwan has porcupine defense strategy, just like carnivores don't attack porcupines because the pain and suffering caused is not worth the, meal. The price of invading a mountainous, very well armed and trained defense forces is very high, not to mention the global economic turmoil. And I know that Commodore Vasan did talk about the geography and, difficult terrain and all that sort of thing. So again, I will defer this question first to Commodore Vasan. You have already actually alluded to it, but I think Vijay Nilekani is asking a more elaborate answer.
Yeah, like you said, I have covered it briefly. The point is very simple. Now, people do talk about this so-called porcupine strategy. But what is the end? The porcupine strategy can work only for some time. All the quills are gone, and then you are defenseless. So China would definitely like to go back to their old proven tactics of bide for time. So they would. That's why I said, they'll go until 2024. They'll try to see which is the new government that's going to come in, and in the meanwhile, they will also strengthen their complete architecture. It's a being an island. You saw what happened after the Nancy Pelosi's visit. Missiles were fired into East China Sea. They were fired into South China Sea. They were fired into the Philippine Sea. These are the three seas that surround Taiwan. So that was to tell them, convey a message and say, I can blockade you. If I blockade you for 15 days, 20 days, 30 days, where is all the item going to come from? Particularly when the third party is going to say, we are not going to have boats on ground. That is what will complicate the whole situation. So this is where, this was signaling. From China wanted to signal and say, this is how I can throttle you. I can continue with this kind of a war where I can blockade you and ensure that you don't receive anything from the sea. So this will work only for a certain period of time, but can only be extended with the support of USA. USA is a major player here, very simple. If the USA abandons Taiwan, there is no future for Taiwan. So it's all right to say that I'll fight till the last man. But the point is that the ground situation is such that it can be something that where Taiwan has been taken over by use of force, which even in their white paper, China has clearly said, I don't want to use force. But that is my core interest, and I'll ensure that I'll take over Taiwan one day. So that one day can be 24, it can be 25, it can be 26, we don't know.
Dr. Rao?
I think Commodore Vasan has already answered that question. I'd just like to sort of highlight a bit of a role about how do you develop an air defense, right? In that strategy. And yes, the role of the handheld, the shoulder-held javelins and stingers have been quite decisive and effective when it comes to Ukraine's defense against Russia. And I think those are things that I think Taiwan is also looking very closely at. So the more number of anti-tank weapons, the more number of these shoulder-held javelins and stingers, and also then, the role of the Western military industrial complex and all that actually becomes pretty handy there. I think he's already answered, so there's nothing more I would like to add to it here.
Thank you. This is going to be the last question, and I'm combining two questions from two separate individuals, Ankush Bhandari and Chitkala Kela. Basically, both Russia and China have violated the airspace of Japan and South Korea recently, besides China lobbing missiles across the strait. Is there some kind of synergism between the two countries? Are they trying to message the international community? Let's start with Dr. Rao.
Well, yes, absolutely. I think part of this. Okay, I think somebody needs to mute themselves. Yeah, okay. So I think, yeah, so whenever it comes to firing these missiles over somebody's airspaces, it is a posturing, it is basically about posturing. It is about signaling the world community that, look here, I can do it and get away with it. Okay. So for example, a lot of times I can give you a parallel from the Russia-Ukraine example, which is that recently there were these stray missiles that landed in Poland, a couple of two missiles that landed on Poland, and there was a lot of talk about whether it's Russian, it's a Russian plan, it's whatever is it. But at the crux of it, obviously it was not anybody's plan. It were two missiles from Ukraine which were Russian made, which kind of fell on Polish territory because they were out to intercept, and they kind of went astray. But the more important thing is that there was suddenly a lot of talk about whether NATO's Article 5 is going to be invoked, and then it said that what kind of a threat would it take to actually invoke NATO's Article 5, and then there were some interesting insights that were coming from the discussions, which is that perhaps it is also, Vladimir Putin's perceiving as to what would it take for NATO to actually invoke its Article 5. How far can it really stretch the wire before it actually snaps? So a lot of these things have to do with posturing in international politics. Understand it's always a game of chicken sometimes, which is that which side is going to swerve first. So the real-time assessment of how serious a particular threat is something which is done, I think, behind closed doors. And what we see a lot of times, like in for public consumption, is these kind of posturings that will elicit some sort of a response, but then often not really lead to a full-fledged war. Okay, so let's look at that. It is a signaling, yes.
Commodore Vasan, same question for you, sir.
The keywords are important: posturing and signaling, which is exactly what these countries are trying to do. When North Korea fires a missile, everybody is worried, what is the nature of the missile, what are the ranges, is it nuclear capable, etc., etc. But what has been done about it? North Korea continues to fire. And in the case when after the Pelosi's visit, China kept firing missiles all over, including in the East China Sea, where they have disputes with China on the Senkaku Islands. So, so this is where, we are even trying to say that it's possible that, in the actual conflict with Taiwan, Japan could be drawn into the gamut. That's a possibility that cannot be, because Japan has had its own historical relations with Taiwan, and they are supportive of Taiwan, though publicly at times they may not say much. So any of this provocative act related to firing of missiles intentionally into areas of dispute is an act of war, if you ask me. It can be interpreted as an act of war. So which means in self-defense you can take countermeasures. That is what perhaps could lead to a full-fledged war. Which is why people, wait and watch. They also use telemetry at that time to analyze the capability of that missile. So, indirectly you're also getting a lot of information about the nature of that missile. So this is important for countries to use, and they do that. All the sophisticated countries do that. So when India fires its Agni 5, why do you think YW6 was here? YW5 was here. They are here to use their telemetry capability to see what is the range, how does it go, what is it MIRV capable, is it nuclear capable? So all these, at least in these times of things, are used by countries to develop databases and carry out a thorough intelligence of the nature of missiles. So yes, coming back to the words which are used, it is about posturing and signaling to say I can do this if you cross that particular Lakshman Rekha.
Thank you, Commodore Vasan, and thank you, Dr. Swasti Rao. Like all good things, this activity is coming to an end because of paucity of time. I will make a couple of comments using my moderator position. I think it's important to realize that China has always learned from mistakes of former Soviet Union and Russian Federation at this point in time. The second and third generation of CCP leaders learned from Mikhail Gorbachev's mistakes. When Gorbachev introduced perestroika and glasnost, China adopted perestroika, economic restructuring, but not glasnost, because they saw what glasnost did to Soviet Empire. And similarly, the fifth generation going into sixth generation usurper is learning from Putin's misadventure what could happen. So it is the consensus between the three panelists, that probably China will not invade Taiwan at this point in time, learning from Putin's experience and the risk of international sanctions and a protracted war. But Chinese are not going to stop at that. It's not a question of if, it's a question of when. And Commodore Vasan has gone on to say that it may not happen till 2024. I will, put an idea. I think it is likely to happen not before 2027. Xi Jinping is a very, very shrewd person. He actually studied in United States. So he is going to study the geopolitical scenario. He also has his own timeline, just like Putin has his own timeline. He's a very ambitious guy. So nothing is going to happen except for maybe economic sanctions or economic slow blockade, some posturing and signaling. But China is bent upon acquiring that island territory by hook or by crook.
Yes.
So it's not a question of that they will keep on postponing independently. And when you have a very ambitious, hegemonic leader who could show the entire world in 20th Congress how I kick Hu Jintao in the butt, he is going to show when he has an upper hand. Remember 1962 invasion of India by China was done under geopolitical circumstances following the Cuban Missile Crisis and the Bay of Pigs fiasco, when international community was distracted. So any attempt, overt or overt, to acquire the territory of Taiwan country / island will be at China's own reckoning when China decides that it is good for them. So let's not, keep our guards down. We are dealing with a very hegemonic, aspiring superpower that wants to control the entire world. And it will have some impact on India, whether we in India take a strong posture or not. Ultimately, Commodore Vasan said that it would be the US response that would decide how China behaves. Unfortunately, the domestic politics in US, with every administration, the policy changes. So with the current administration, the focus is on the Cold War mentality. The current administration does not give so much of attention to the threat posed by China and is singularly focused on threat coming from Russia, which is somewhat myopic. It will depend upon who is heading the administration in US in 2024 also, besides who wins, whether DPP or KMT, the Taiwanese presidential election. So there are a lot of unknown factors at this point in time, but the only thing that is known is that China will try to win the war without fighting a battle. And they have been very good at this. I must thank all three panelists who took time to participate in this discussion. I'm also very thankful to our audience, on a Sunday morning in US and Sunday evening in India, spending 1.5 hours of your time requires a lot of commitment and dedication to geopolitics and understanding of international relations. And lastly, I'm very thankful to Team CSA. That includes Mr. Ripudaman Pachori, Mr. Rajiv Verma, and Mr. Ankush Bhandari. These are the people who help me run these kind of programs and make them success. So I am thankful to them. This is our last program for the year of 2022. We will not have a distinguished lecture series because that will be during holiday time between Christmas and New Year, and we would hardly have anyone interested in participating in a serious discussion. So we'll resume this in January 2023. My thanks to Francois, thanks to Swati, and thanks to Commodore Vasan. We hope to see you guys again. And with those comments, I'm going to close this meeting. Namaskar.
Thank you. Jai Hind.